I woke up that morning thinking it was going to be a normal Tuesday. I was wrong. My son Owen had called me the night before, said he needed to talk, said it was important. He used that tone, the careful one, the one he started using after he married Tiffany. Not angry, not warm, measured. Like he was reading from a script he and his wife had worked out together over dinner. I drove to their place on Ridgemont Crescent in Oakville. It was late October. The maples had gone red and gold, and I remember thinking how beautiful everything looked. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a moment, just looking at the house I had helped them buy. Not directly. Owen would never accept that. But I had refinanced my own place in Waterdown 3 years ago, taken $60,000 out, and quietly paid off the last of their mortgage when Tiffany lost her job, and Owen had too much pride to ask for help. He didn't know. I made sure he didn't know. I told myself that's what fathers do. I went inside. Owen was at the kitchen island, standing. Tiffany was at the table, arms crossed. Their daughter, my granddaughter Hazel, was nowhere to be seen. That was the first sign. Whenever I visited, Hazel ran to the door. She was 7 years old and she smelled like shampoo, and she always had something to show me. A drawing, a rock she found, a joke she'd learned at school. The absence of her in that doorway made something tighten in my chest before anyone said a word. Dad. Owen gestured at the kitchen chair. Sit down. I sat. He talked for about 4 minutes. I know because I kept watching the clock on the microwave behind his shoulder, not because I was bored, but because I needed something steady to look at. He said that Tiffany and he had been talking, and they felt. He used "we felt," which I noted, that the current arrangement was causing stress on their household. He said my visits had become, and here he paused, unpredictable. He said that they were establishing new boundaries for their family's well-being. He said that going forward, I was welcome to see Hazel at scheduled times, no more than twice a month, and that I should call ahead at least 72 hours in advance. Tiffany didn't say anything. She had a mug in front of her. She looked at the table. I asked Owen what I had done. He said I hadn't done anything specifically. He said it was cumulative. He said I had a way of making Tiffany feel judged. He said I dropped by too often. He said, last Christmas given Hazel a savings bond instead of a toy, and made a comment about financial literacy that Tiffany found condescending. I sat with that for a moment. A savings bond. I had given my granddaughter a $500 savings bond from TD Bank because I wanted her to have something when she turned 18, and I had said, because I thought it was true, and because I still believe it, that teaching children the value of money is one of the kindest things you can do for them. I didn't say it to wound Tiffany. I didn't say it as a criticism. But apparently it had been filed away, noted, added to a list I didn't know existed. I see, I said. I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I'm 63 years old, and I stopped raising my voice a long time ago, sometimes after my wife Margaret passed, and I realized that anger burns energy you can't afford to waste. I put on my coat. I asked if Hazel was home. Owen said she was at school. I said to please tell her I'd called, and then I walked out. I sat in my truck in their driveway for longer than I should have. I didn't cry. I was somewhere past crying, in that flat gray place where things are too large to feel all at once. I thought about the $60,000. I thought about the 37 weekends I'd driven out to Oakville in the past 2 years, sometimes just to mow their lawn, or fix a hinge, or sit with Hazel, while Owen and Tiffany went for dinner alone. I thought about how the last time I'd held Hazel's hand walking into the Rogers Center, she'd said, "Grandpa, I want to come live with you." And I'd laughed and said, "You'd get bored of me." And she'd said, very seriously, "No, I wouldn't." I put the truck in reverse, and I drove. I didn't have a plan. That was unusual for me. I spent 31 years as a project manager for a civil engineering firm. I am not someone who operates without a plan. But that morning, I just drove north on the QEW, then west, and eventually I found myself pulling into a Tim Hortons somewhere near Hamilton, staring at the menu board without reading it. The woman behind the counter was maybe 60, maybe a bit older, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a name tag that said Bernice. She looked at me for a moment and said, "Large dark roast." I said, "Please." She poured it without me asking again, slid it across the counter, and said, "Rough morning." I must have looked worse than I realized. "My son just told me I can see my granddaughter twice a month." I said, 72 hours notice. Bernice set down the pot and looked at me, not with pity, with recognition, like she knew exactly what that sentence meant without needing the context around it. "Sit down," she said. "I'll bring you a refill when you need one." I sat at a table by the window and drank my coffee and watched the trucks go by on the highway. I didn't call anyone. My brother Ken was in Victoria, and we talked every few weeks, but I didn't want to explain the whole thing over the phone. My friend Doug from the old firm had his own health problems now, and Margaret had been gone for 4 years, and there were still mornings when I reached for my phone to tell her something before I remembered. I drove home to Waterdown. The house felt the way it always felt, too quiet. The way a house gets when the life that filled it has moved on to other places. Margaret's garden was still there, though I'd never had her touch with it. I'd kept the roses because she loved them. They were done for the season now, just thorny sticks in the November coming. I spent a week not talking about it. I went to work. I had taken a part-time consulting role after retirement, 3 days a week with a smaller firm in Burlington, and I answered emails and reviewed drainage plans and did not mention my son or my granddaughter to anyone. At night, I cooked something simple, watched the news, went to bed. On a Thursday evening, about 10 days after the conversation at Owen's house, I was at the Burlington Public Library. I go there sometimes just to read. It's quiet and warm, and there's something about the weight of books around you that settles the mind. I was in one of the armchairs near the window with a copy of a Lawrence Hill novel I'd been meaning to get to for years, and I was not reading it. I was staring at the page. The woman in the armchair next to mine said, "That's a good one, but you have to get past the first 50 pages. I looked up. She was probably 70, maybe a bit past it. Small, neat white hair cut short and practical. She had reading glasses on and a hard cover open in her lap. Something thick, looked like history. She was looking at me with mild, direct eyes, the way some older people do when they've stopped caring about whether directness is polite. "You've read it," I said. "Twice," she said. "First time I didn't finish. Second time I couldn't put it down." She glanced at the page I was on. "You're distracted." "I am," I said. She went back to her book. I went back to pretending to read mine. After a few minutes she said, without looking up, "You don't have to tell me, but you've been sitting there for 40 minutes and turned one page." Her name was Miriam. I found that out later. That evening she was just a stranger with a direct manner and a library book, and for reasons I still don't entirely understand, I told her about Owen. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. About the meeting, about Hazel, about the savings bond. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it should be. When I finished, she said, "What do you want to do?" I said I didn't know. I said maybe nothing. I said maybe he was right, and I had been too present, too much in their lives. She said, "Is that what you actually think, or is that what it's easier to believe?" I didn't answer right away. She said, "Because there's a difference between a father who meddles and a father who shows up. They can look similar from a certain angle, but they're not the same thing." We talked for another hour. She was a retired family court judge. She told me that matter-of-factly, the way you state a fact rather than offer a credential. She had seen, she said, a very great many situations involving grandparents and access, and the complicated weight of family obligation. She didn't give me legal advice. She was careful about that. But she asked me good questions. Was my relationship with Hazel important to Hazel, not just to me? Had Owen ever given me specific, addressable concerns before this? Was there documentation of anything? Cards, gifts, regular contact that demonstrated the nature of our relationship? I said I had years of photos, birthdays, hockey games, summers at my place. Hazel had spent 3 weeks with me last August when Owen and Tiffany went to Portugal. 3 weeks. She'd learned to bake scones, and she'd become interested in my bird feeder, and she'd ask me every morning what bird that was, and I'd look them up on my phone because I didn't know half of them. Miriam nodded slowly. She said, "In Ontario, grandparents can apply for access under the Children's Law Reform Act if contact is being denied and it's in the child's best interest. I'm not saying you should. I'm saying you should know it exists." I didn't know it existed. She wrote something on a piece of library notepad paper, a name and a phone number, and she slid it across the armrest between our chairs. She said this was a family lawyer she trusted, someone who worked out of a practice in Hamilton, and that she was good and not unnecessarily expensive, and that she had seen cases like mine before. You don't have to use it, Miriam said. But knowing your options and using them are two different things. You can know something without having to act on it yet. I folded the paper and put it in my coat pocket. I said, "Why are you helping me? You don't know me." She looked at me over her glasses. She said, "My husband's parents were kept from our children for 4 years by us. By me, mainly. I was young and proud, and I thought I knew best. By the time I understood what I'd done, my father-in-law was gone. My children lost those years." She paused. "I've spent a long time thinking about that. I walked home that night. The library is only 6 blocks from my house. In the November cold, with my hands in my pockets, and I thought about what she'd said. About the difference between a father who meddles and a father who shows up. About Hazel learning the names of birds. About Miriam and her father-in-law, and 4 years that couldn't be returned. I called Owen the next morning. He answered on the second ring, which surprised me. I'd expected voicemail. I said, "I'd like to talk. Not to argue, just to talk." He was quiet for a moment. I said, "I know there are things I've done that have felt like pressure, even when I didn't intend them that way. I'd like to understand what they are so I can do better. But I also need you to understand that what I have with Hazel, that's real. And I'd like the chance to talk about how we protect that for her, not just manage it for us." Owen said, "Dad." I waited. He said, "I didn't sleep much last week." I said, "Neither did I." He said he'd talk to Tiffany. He said, "Give him a few days." I gave him 5. On a Sunday afternoon, he called back and said, "Could I come for dinner on Tuesday?" Not a formal sit-down, just dinner, he said. Tiffany was making pasta. I said yes. Hazel opened the door when I knocked. She had a drawing she'd made at school, a house with a big yellow sun and 4 stick figures, and she pointed at the tallest one and said, "That's you, Grandpa. You're the tallest because you're the oldest." I laughed. It was the first real laugh in 3 weeks. Dinner was not easy the way easy dinners are. There were silences, and there were moments where Tiffany and I were both careful around each other, and careful in different ways. But she told me at one point, unprompted, that Hazel had asked 3 times in the past week when she was going to see me. She said it like a concession, and I accepted it like one. Owen walked me to my truck afterward. It was cold, breath visible, the street quiet. He said, "I handled it badly, the whole conversation." I said, "I think we both could have done things differently before it got to that conversation." He looked at the ground for a moment. I said, "The savings bond." I didn't mean it the way it landed. I should have read the room. He almost smiled at that. He said, "She did like the card you wrote with it. I don't think I told you that. She put it in her little box, the one she keeps important things in." I hadn't known that either. I drove home on the highway with the radio off, just the road and the dark and the lights of the other cars. I thought about all the things we do for the people we love that they never know about. The 60,000 refinanced, the weekends driven, the bird names looked up on a phone at 6 in the morning so that I'd have the right answer when Hazel pointed out the window before breakfast. I thought about Miriam in the library and about the piece of paper folded in my coat pocket that I hadn't had to use. I thought about how much damage is done in families by pride and assumption and the failure to say, plainly, what we mean and what we need. 3 weeks ago, my son told me I could see my granddaughter twice a month with 72 hours notice. Last Saturday, Hazel and I drove out to Christie Lake Conservation Area with a thermos of hot chocolate and 2 pairs of binoculars I'd found at a garage sale for $7. We walked along the trail for 2 hours, and she wrote down the names of every bird we spotted in a little notebook she'd picked out herself at Dollarama. 11 species. She counted them twice. On the way back to the car, she put her hand in mine and said, "Grandpa, can we do this every week?" I said, "I'll talk to your dad." She said, "He'll say yes, he's been nicer lately." I didn't say anything to that, I just held her hand. Sometimes things don't resolve the way you think they will. There's no villain who gets his comeuppance, no dramatic reversal, no moment where everyone realizes they were wrong and says so out loud. Real life is usually quieter than that. Someone says, "I didn't sleep much," and someone else says, "Neither did I," and you find your way back to the table. But I want to say something to anyone listening who's been where I've been. Standing in a driveway not knowing where to drive, feeling the distance from the people you love like a physical thing, like weather. Don't be too proud to sit still in a Tim Hortons for an hour. Don't be too closed to talk to a stranger in a library. The people who see us most clearly are sometimes the ones who have no reason to flatter us, and no stake in telling us anything but the truth. And hold your ground, not with anger, not with ultimatums, but with the quiet, patient certainty that what you offer matters, that your presence in a child's life is not a privilege granted to you by whoever happens to be the gatekeeper that week. It is earned, day by day, bird by bird, scone by scone. Hazel kept the card. She put it in her box of important things. That's enough for me.